And I'll be talking about methodological things and even some philosophy of science kind of affairs. So at a very meta level of things in psycho and neurolinguistics and linguistics and studies of grammar, you name it. If I went into nitty-gritty details of this field, we would be talking about umpteen of things because it's so varied. I try to give you some sort of a psychic or psychic legacy of mine, showing you what not to do and what should be done if you are doing psycho or neurolinguistics. And especially I'd like to show you what you should claim or not to claim when you are doing something. So the talk will be in 3 parts. Does my hollering reach you back there? Do I need a mic? No, okay, fine. So, about everything, you have to know what you're doing. Noam Chomsky, in his first good book, 57, Syntactic Structures, told us that linguists, in his mind, and he still thinks about like that, he's a bad philosopher but a good syntactician. He says that theoretical linguistics, theory of grammar, it's experimental because the linguist, when he ponders upon strings of words like Mary shot his wife or her wife, and the grammaticality of that string in English is experimenting with his mind. Phooey! That's no, the word experimentation is not used in its proper sense in this term. Linguistics is not studies of grammar are not experimental. But that's what Chomsky keeps telling. And people tell lots of things about what they claim they are doing. And somebody else usually has to say, boy, you don't know yourself. You are claiming wrong things about your doings and your object of study. And that's something that you have to always to bear in mind. If you are doing linguistics, do linguistics. If you are doing psychology, do psychology. If you are doing neurology, do neurology. Okay, it's easy to say that, but when you are doing something in between, like psycho or neurolinguistics, what you should be doing, I don't know. I'm trying to give you one view about these kind of things, and it's only my modest view. And by the way, you can, as I did with Ari's presentation, I've been married for over close to 40 years, and am the only son, male, among in a family with 5 children. I have 4 sisters. I've been interrupted all the time. So you can interrupt me anytime. So you have to know your ballpark. That's the first thing. And then we have to think about the difficulties inherent in neurologically non-typical populations, non-normals. There's lots of things going on there that you should be made aware of, and which should direct your attention to the setup of your experiments or other empirical studies. This chapter 2 will be mostly about case studies versus group studies, when to and when not to. And then some practical advice about sociology of science. Scholars and scientists are human beings with emotions, aspirations, fears, sort of a affiliation to social networking and things like this. You are always working with human beings, And that's something you have to bear in mind. We are not speaking about working with machines. Okay, so you have to know your ballpark. There's something about, so when you are telling somebody, even to a relative who doesn't know anything about science, or I use the word science in the good old German kind of way, Wissenschaft, meaning also Geisteswissenschaften, not just natural science. Science is Wissenschaft. Okay, in this talk. So, if you are defining your own field, linguistics, psycholinguistics, or whatever, how to define it? What's the sort of prototypical area of that academic pursuit, intellectual pursuit? There's prototypical psycholinguistics and somewhat aprototypical, and so forth. You have to be sure where you are working in. Sorry about the double inessive in that case. And you can try these 4 groups of criteria to define your own position, your own ballpark. If I'm doing linguistics, neurology, whatever, am I able to define it so that it's clear even to me, and so that I know where I'm actually not so very much working as a linguist or psycholinguistic linguist or so forth. And these are the 4 ways to define any scientific discipline, any paradigm or scientific matrix, as good old Thomas Kuhn used to call them in his later years. So it's of course conceptual. That's the best thing to define anything. Of course, is of course conceptual definitions, and that's what grammars are about. Grammars are conceptual analysis of linguistic forms. That's nothing but that. Yeah, nothing else. Only that. And it's of course very easy to conceptualize a field like cosmology. So, okay, it's the study of sort of big structures in the universe. Try to do that, let's say, with linguistics, which ain't the same as grammar, or with psycholinguistics. And of course, if you can't do it conceptually, you can define your field of studies by stating the object of study. Well, language is studied by most of the people, even people in education, buoy. But still, anthropologists, linguists, psychologists, neurologists, you name it. So it's very hard to define linguistics, for instance, with those criteria. Then it's methods, okay? Neurolinguistics, psycholinguistics, experimental, you can define that in your own way. And the weakest group of criteria comes from the institutional set. There's a field called applied linguistics in linguistics. Was ist das, as they used to say in Berlin. How to define? Neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics conceptually would be good examples of applied linguistics, but they ain't, as we say in Boston. Because applied linguistics over the years has become to mean something like linguistically oriented studies of language teaching, language teaching and second language learning. It's very much in education. It's education based. So, and by the way, we can't see the stupidity of that thing. We have theoretical linguistics, okay, grammar in its core, and then we had applied linguistics, which is far removed from that. Think about mathematics and applied mathematics. There the marriage is beautiful. But in linguistics, it's queer. Applied linguistics is something, it's not Neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics should be part and parcel of applied linguistics, but they are not. And no psycholinguist in his or her right mind would say that I'm working in applied linguistics, because that would label him as a scholar in the field of education. And that's the way things go. Actually, Spitz-Corder, a big name in applied linguistics, was once asked at a conference, applied linguistics conference, how to define applied linguistics. His response was, applied linguistics is the kind of linguistics we are doing in the departments of applied linguistics. I don't continue.
Why is this important? Isn't this just a matter of terminology?
Yeah, but still, I mean, terminology, I mean...
You want to have the right terms, but...
Yeah, definitely. A rose is a rose is a rose. And for an outsider, linguistics is a queer field, because it's applied X, ain't applied X. You can't derive it from the general sense of theoretical versus applied sciences. Yeah, that's my main point. And it was a good time killer. But that's another story. So here's my point. I'm following good old Wittgenstein and good old Finnish philosopher of linguistics and grammar, Esa Itkonen. Ain't it nice using the Wittgensteinian game analogy? Grammars define the game. The English grammar is about the correct sentence, correct form of sentence in a language that we call English. Well-formed sentences in language English are sort of in the purview of grammatical studies of that language. So it defines the game. And social linguistics defines how it's played. Read Wittgenstein and his books. There's nice things about other things, even in language. Psycholinguistics, what's the biggest thing, what's the fundamental thing in linguistics? It's the learnability issue. The good old Platonic question. How is it possible that a representative of the species Homo sapiens sapiens comes to know so much during the few years that he tramps on this globe? So how are games or grammars learned? Learnability issue. How do we come to know that this string of blah 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 blah, acoustic string of course, fundamentally, basically, is a correct sentence in Russian? How can we, what are the criteria and how we come to know that? And since language, nota bene, since grammatical competence defines Homo sapiens sapiens, defining the sentence in language defines being a human. Linguistics is in the core of studies of the human species. Be proud of that. We ain't just working on why is this accusative or dative in this case. We are defining our species. Wow, what a task. That's, yeah, Chomsky's right in this case. He's very adamant about this. Grammatical studies are in the core of cognitive science. And of course they are. And we have done this sort of with some kind of programmatic rigor only for 40 or 50 years. So we are still in the Stone Age. Think about that. We have seen the light. We have seen the calling. We have seen the mission. Yeah. 20 generations from this, they know more. Outliers in linguistics are that kind of stuff. And of course, there's theoretical, empirical. Let's go. We could talk about this slide for, let's say, ad nauseam and ad infinitum. But you can play around with that when you are drinking beer tonight with your best or worst friend. So, practical demarcations are, of course, this in psycholinguistics or neurolinguistics, what the populations are like and so forth. I just go through it like this. You have them on paper, and they are expandable. They are just samples, extracts, and so forth. You can go on with the game. By the way, only with this D, why are simulations sort of mentioned here? How would you define discipline-wise cognitive science? Now we are defining a field. What are the crucial ingredients when you are making a cake called cognitive science? What does your cookbook say? What's the recipe? You should have philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and computer science in that. Because we want to test, simulate, or whatever our cognitive capacities with the present day stupid serial digital computers. That's in cognitive science. You have these four fields, and linguistics is one of them. Computer science, psychology, and philosophy, definitely. By the way, about cognitive science, when you visit the Harvard University bookstore in Cambridge, not the real one, I mean the American one, Massachusetts, they don't have, although guys in the field at MIT are just working around the corner, so to say, a few blocks down, though. At the linguistics and philosophy department, Chomsky and so forth, they don't have a linguistics section in the bookshelves any longer. Linguistics is embedded in the shelves of cognitive science. That has been the trend for the last 20 years. Linguistics is part of cognitive science in most US universities. I won't call them American because for me Cuba is also in America. So sorry about this. Let's not get too political. I want to go home tomorrow. And it's 40 years to date. I was here May Day 73. Last time I was on this side of the border in Leningrad. Things have really changed. You have done beautiful things here. I love this town. Okay, this is something that you should ponder on if you are doing experimentation or gathering data of any sorts, observational data as well. What's the population? And there are good things for doing it in the case with the case study approach. And he were to call Professor Chernigovskaya. So that's not leaving the room because of me, but because of her. That's what he told me when we were holding hands in the toilet. Our own hands. So there's been two big fights about case studies, sort of individual people as subjects, versus group studies. And both of these sort of scientific debates have been initiated by the same person, Alfonso Caramazza, whom he worked with us in the agrammatism project of Menn and Obler. He was only 35 in those days. Well, it was 1982. Alfonso and his associates were vehemently arguing for the case study approach, and David Kaplan from the same Beantown, meaning Boston, from the same town of Boston in the States, was arguing for the usability of group studies in neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics. And these sort of couple of sequences of articles from the mid-80s and the other one in the sort of in the 90s are really a nice read. And actually Kaplan is in his book, White Book, about aphasiology and whatever, sort of gives the synopsis of the first round. So the outset was that agrammatism, of course, it was the first, let's say, syndrome that was really studied by linguists, because it's very interesting, as the word, even the label agrammatism shows. What is agrammatism? Karamat tried to tell that it's not a uniform defect. There's lots of variation from individual to individual. So what is agrammatism? Clinically, we can profile it. We can say that this guy is agrammatic, he's jargon aphasic, he has conduction aphasia, and so forth. Or applying the Lurian setup, you can have different labels which are more or less the same. Any case, so clinically it's okay, but when you really go into nitty details of your agrammatic subjects' linguistic performance, you soon notice, aha, this guy is more morphologically impaired, this is more phonologically impaired, that guy is more syntaxically impaired, etc., etc. So it's a very heterogeneous assumption. The main thing being, nota bene, when you are working with non-typical adults, non-typical subjects, meaning who are not adult, sort of neurologically and otherwise normal speakers of, and adult speakers of the speaking community, beware. If they are children, they are not normal. They are not normal speakers of Finnish or Russian, of course, because they are acquiring the system. There's and if they are adults like me, they get this adult as I am. They might have some spurious traces of upcoming dementia as I have. I've noticed that. I've been studying aphasia, SLI, Asperger. Now I'm into schizophrenia and going into dementia with these two guys. And now I see that I have some symptoms of the last one, but I'm fighting. It's a horrible thing. I've been working with these kind of things. I'm losing the grip on my Finnish lexicon. I'll be a good subject for you in 5 years. I'll volunteer. But of course, being such a nasty guy, I consciously will mess your data. So you can't assume that your group is homogeneous in any sort of atypical population. L2 learner, L1 learner, and so forth. Brain damaged, of course not. Per definitionem, aphasics are not your typical speakers of that language. So this should be you should think about the heterogeneity or homogeneity of your population in various ways and control for that before you lump the data. People, yeah. Of course you have some ANOVAs or whatever to ex post facto check for things, but it's stupid just to put garbage in because it's usually garbage out. It's Gigo effect, typically. So why not do it properly at the outset when you're beginning with that kind of pursuit, any kind of pursuit? And even with sort of atypical, because they are all different, everybody's different. Remember this, take pain to find sort of a representative exemplars, individuals of that syndrome or that category, whatever, children of age 5 or whatever. Sort of course, and you have to define the sort of representativeness in a way. And there are various ways, like panel judgments of their linguistic capacities, non-linguistic capacities. But anyway, about our agrammatic patients that we published in the Men and Obler book in 1990 with Benjamin's as one of the where 12 languages were studied for the agrammatism. For these two speakers, agrammatic speakers, Matti Laine, my psychologist friend, and me, went through some like 50 potential Finnish phasics and really analyzed them. And there were two sort of that were sort of good exemplars of that thing, of that category. Remember the notion of prototypicality in any categorical kind of things. So there are prototypical good exemplars and bad exemplars. Of course, you take the good exemplars. How to define goodiness is another matter. It depends. It's very contingent on your goals and so forth. But still, don't do it with anybody that just happens to be agrammatic or 5-year-old Finn learning his or her first language, Finnish. So don't let potential data direct you. Don't be that much of a fool. So, of course, there's this kind of advantage that you have in group studies, that you can, of course, when you have lots of data, you may come up with something, some defect, impairment, or disability, relatively speaking, in the group that you wouldn't notice without having done that analysis. But is that worth it? Because, okay, and of course there is, when you're doing case studies, one case, one agrammatic here representing the Finnish agrammatic population, how can you extrapolate on from one case? Make the generalizations, because you always have to talk about general things. Science is generalization and abstraction away from observational nitty-gritties to make us understand the world better. We are stupid animals, we need simple explanations, and that's what science is. Scientific theories are for. Because of our stupidity, we can't sort of keep track of all observational sense data that we have. We have to make abstractions. So, and how to obtain double dissociation? What's that? While I'm hectically drinking Russian water, please respond to me. What's double dissociation? And it's very crucial in neurolinguistics and studies in linguistic pathology, especially phasiology, you name it. So, okay. It's this kind of thing. I'm working with Finnish agrammatism, and I find that agrammatic A is fails in his case marking. His is now gender free. It's his or her all the time. So, could it be the case that agrammatism is about, it sort of necessarily involves a case marking impairment, not being able to mark your object with the accusative cases or whatever in that language, with the partitive and accusative and so forth, genitive, accusative. Well, you can't. It could be the case that case marking is so difficult in a way that it's not case marking per se as a phenomenon, as a linguistic category. Nota bene. That's problematic. But if you find another agrammatic, that's dissociation. Double dissociation would be the case where you have agrammatic B, who is very good in case marking, but fails in his or her, so let's say, thematic, let's say, word order. Then you could say that within agrammatism or whatever, case marking can be selectively impaired, because A has a case marking defect, B is in the same group, he doesn't have case marking effect, he has a word order effect. It's double dissociation in a way. So case marking, and it's not about the difficulty of case marking as such. Can you get the idea? Perhaps I woke up with the wrong foot, but that's the main thing, that they can be selectively impaired, so that unimpaired, impaired, impaired, unimpaired goes like this. And of course, within one subject, you can't say that 9 in the morning he was good in his case marking, 10 in the morning he was bad. Agrammatism is not about that. So there's no sort of you can't see the different kind of symptoms in one patient and see that claim that it's typically agrammatism that is the causal factor behind it, because it could be the case that they are processually, one of them is processually more, inherently more difficult. Okay, let's hope I got the message through. You are better listeners than my wife. And how can you falsify anything based on one thing? Because falsifiability, as you know, is the part of parcel of the property of any theoretical claim. They have to, in principle, they have to be falsifiable. Yes, God exists. It is not a scientific statement, because you can't test it, and you can't, ergo you can't, in principle, falsify it. Neither can you confirm it, but that's another story. Karamazov responds that there are group studies and there are group studies. The way things should be done in his mind is to do it, to advance progress little by little, case study by case study, to get case A, make predictions, deep study case B, test the predictions, and so forth and so forth. Actually, when you are doing this sort of sounds stupid, but when you are really trying to give the linguistic and if not only grammatic profile of a single pathological individual, it means working for 1 year to really get the picture. Case studies, if you do it sort of in deep way, it takes months. 1 year would be the sort of typical window of doing things. For us normals, it's nothing. But when you have a defective system and try to get the causal links and the really weak spots, you have to do it various ways. Every modality, input-output holes that we have to be checked. Every level of grammar, everything. And everything means a lot in grammar. everything is, of course, relative. But that's the way it should go. Case studies are the only way of doing solid science in psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, psycholinguistics of pathological population, or neurolinguistics of them. And I'm very much for that. Group studies are good for clinical purposes. When you just get the overall profile of what's agrammatism in Russian, you can do it the Lurian way, or the Jacobsonian way, or whosoever, Harold Goodglass way, the Boston way. Group studies. But it's just for getting, labeling people in a very, very general sense. So that clinical neuropsychology, cognitive neuropsychology differ in those respects and in the pursuits and aims. Then, Opsan. Actually, many neurolinguistic groups, us in Finland, as one example, have followed the sort of Karamazian way of doing things. We have tried to find theoretically interesting subjects. That's the main thing, theoretically interesting subjects to study X. Jean-Luc Nespoulos has a good patient in Toulouse that he has been torturing for close to 50 years now. Monsieur Clermont, who's stable agrammatic and a good test bed and a hypothesis generator for the normal language processing. That's the one thing that we are into phraseology as linguists, to get data for normal language processing. Of course, when we are normals and speaking without any errors, okay, some slips or whatever, and they have their they are good pieces of evidence as well. But we are what can we infer from normal unimpaired processing? Nothing. But if you have one box in the blueprint, in the mental blueprint, that's defective, let's say a case marking in aphasic A, and you can test what other things are linked to that. What would this case marking defect be coupled with, or even cause in his or her input and output processing of this language? That's the why Roman Jacobson did phraseological studies in language, and that's, as a linguist, that's my purpose as well. And we found the case of HH. There's some repetition in that title. We have a good, stable agrammatic, very cooperative, and we have tested him for years, from the late 80s, so herregud, 25 years or something like that. And it's a beautiful case of deep dyslexia. Deep dyslexia means that you can't read when you are given, and dyslexia is a misnomer. It's a blatant feature that everybody notices. He can't read, but it doesn't mean that it's his reading abilities as such that are impaired. That's such a label. It means that he can't retrieve phonology from print, meaning he can read only words that he had learned to read before his cerebral accident, pre-morbidly. Anything encountered in visual form in his native language, lost. Possible sort of pseudo words of Finnish, beautifully conforming to the morphotactic or phonotactic, whatever, phonotactic form of the language. Niente, nothing. He can't, as if it were nothing. No, okay, that's no big deal. For psychologists, that's a big deal. But for us, it's very beautiful that it's selective also in his bound morphology reading. He can read words like, let's say, car. I give you English examples. Car, very beautiful. Premorbidly sort of encountered visual forms. Auto is okay. And even words like, let's say, autotalli, garage, car park. Okay, if he had encountered them. And also derivative forms like autoton, without car. It's a derivative form of auto, without car, without, carless. How about inflectional forms? Drop. In car, autossa. He reads auto, and then his system realizes that there is something. He can say carless, autoton. There is something. Or autotalli. The system gets some information that there is print that should be transformed into phonology, output phonology. But very low performance on inflectional forms. And when we go further along the route, Finnish words like, now I have to, how much time do I have? Santeri, wake up. Well, this is a long Finnish word, so it takes something like 40 minutes to write.
We have 5 minutes left.
Well, let's say auto was a bad example, of course. A better word would be kana, Jesus, which is hen. Of course, that's a Germanic loan. Seen in the English hen or Swedish hane. Hen. We have pinched lots of words from you guys. So this is hen. This is la, means this is a derivative ending saying a place where lots of these guys are. So Kanala is hen house. But this is a bound form. It's not a house. It's a bound form. Then some phonological things happening. This is a Finnish word. Kanaloissammekohan. I wonder if also even in our hen houses. Something like that. This is the derivative saying this is the place of X's. This is a lexical entry. Kanala is hen house. This is plural. This is case marker in. So this is in hen houses. This is our. It's possessive. In our hen houses. This language is very easy. You don't need any syntax. And this is a question marker. In our hen houses, question mark. And this is sort of a pragmatic marker saying, aha, I know that it was there. Well, these guys define the paradigm. Plural and case define the inflectional paradigms of Finnish noun-like items, nominals. Let's say nouns. To make a long story short, these don't define paradigms. They are sort of extra or semi. There's one case where they define it, but it doesn't. We have something like 80 declinations, inflectional paradigms in nouns. And in one paradigm, this possessive is crucial. But let's say it's not crucial. It's extra paradigmatic. And of course, these pragmatic, syntactic and pragmatic critics don't define anything. They are sort of, I call them sort of a morphological horse, because they go with everybody. No, they don't care about the syntactic category of the stem. They go even with adverbs, connectives, you name it, any word. So they had nothing to do with the sort of paradigms. These guys have, this is for HH, this is pretty good, like hen house, that's pretty good. It's a lexical entry. If it's a for pre-morbidly familiar word. Failure, hello, very bad with these, and over here, niente, nothing. His system doesn't see these extra paradigmatic suffixes at all. They are never given as an incorrect response either, nota bene, while other categories are, as if they didn't exist. And he sees the word. He can't do it. So where's your dyslexia? And where's your phonology? This is a very sort of a intriguing case, which tells you that even reading visual strings like these are affected by your morphological knowledge. It means that when you are reading this, actually you are reading also the link between this, because this determines the form of this in your Finnish grammar. This has nothing to do with it, except in the one inflectional form. And these really have nothing, they have no links to this. So reading is a very complex affair. It ain't just transforming sort of a typographical visual forms phoneme by phoneme and output it phonologically. Reading aloud, it's a grammatical process. Wow then. Yeah.
What about his writing to dictation abilities?
Very bad, very bad. Same kind of phenomenon. So that's what I call, it's not dyslexia. Lexia is not the main thing. It's his dysmorphology, in a way. It should be dysmorphology. Yeah. This is, as I told during Ari's presentation, teaching and shouting aloud one's own opinions, whether about football or Finnish morphology, is a good thing. I would call this dysmorphology, in a way. Or with them.
Can I also confirm? So these deficits also occur with words that he knew before. So you made an example of car. So auto stuff.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. So this word was this was known to him, yeah, and autos as well. Auto, yeah. So yeah, so that's true.
This is a very strong argument for obligatory segmentation in normal language processing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is, and actually, Matti Laine and I have something like in 94 we have this Finnish stem alloform inflectional decomposition that we wrote about in cognitive processes and cognitive neuropsychology, and it's about stem allomorph inflectional decomposition. We believe in decomposing Finnish lexical items when they are presented in isolation. Remember this. You can characterize Finnish by giving its sentence grammar, but of course Finnish texts are not like your sentence grammars tell you. There's pragmatic things and otherwise sort of enriching it, information structure and so forth. And this is about isolated I. We have also proven, and in texts, most of these decomposition effects are fading. They fade away because we make predictions about the possible inflectional or whatever morphological form of the incoming words. With the sort of, like in the local gene model, it's incremental. We make, all the time we make predictions. And when you say, when let's say, encounter a Finnish word like verb, like tykkää, to like, its object has to be in the elative and nothing but in the elative, strangely enough. Of course, your machinery works so that you don't have to process the elative marker on the object, as it should be processed when the word is given in isolation. Of course, things are different in your sort of a running speech or running text, but it doesn't falsify these. Although nobody would encounter of, let's say, an English sentence like Tatiana loves Nikolai. She's married to Nikolai. You never encounter it, but you process it. You get it? So isolated things, they are good examples of your language. It's a correct sentence of English, and these guys are Finnish, and there's some queer things happening in isolation. But it doesn't mean that Laine and I are predicting that these things happen also in the processing of Finnish in any other environment as well. But in isolation, when you get it in isolation, this is what even physics is about. Physics, which is the makes biggest advances in science, brings universe into a lab, CERN, abstracts away anything and gets good results. But it still doesn't predict. Get the idea? All the intervening variables kicked out. We don't need pragmatic. If I'm studying Finnish word internal morphology, I'm studying Finnish word internal morphology and kill all the possible sources of intervening variables. It's very tedious and, let's say, not very sort of a, well, sometimes one gets kicks, but not very often. If you want to have a good look of HH performance on Finnish multimorphemic words in isolated reading, you can have a look into that Bastians-Thompson chapter of ours. Then whatever. And of course, HH was there, as I told you, he was our hypothesis generator. And of course, we tried to falsify test, and of course, when you are claiming something in science, you don't try to strengthen your position. You do your best. You are the first one to trying to falsify your own claims. Science is not politics, quite the reverse. You always think that I'm wrong. I must have made a mistake, because it's socially very embarrassing when somebody like Ari comes to St. Petersburg and tells these guys were wrong. It would have been better that these guys would have detected themselves. Ain't that the nature of the game? But of course, as good scientist, one has to tell when the king doesn't have any clothes, whether the king is myself or somebody else. You have to be honest with yourself and fight against yourself. You have to be married to yourself. You have to be schizophrenic. I can tell you things about schizophrenic Finnish. Okay. We found supporting evidence for this decomposition and so forth stuff that HH produced us from these sources. And of course there's one big psycholinguistic laboratory that we don't have there. Being in general linguistics, or I would say linguistics, and I have to be jack of all trades and teach everything from psycholinguistics to diachronic, historical linguistics, language change, social linguistics, or whatever. Language change is a good, slow laboratory of psycholinguistics as well. The way language changes socially, sort of in the big sense, not in nitty-gritty details, lexical or whatever, sort of in its purest form, when you reduce all the contact possibilities and so forth, language change shows you how we actually treat language subconsciously. Ain't that the case? We are not innovating new morphological forms, sort of with purpose, on purpose. It happens little by little, subconsciously, in the soul, and if they accept it as something. Yeah. So, historical language change is sort of slow motion laboratory of psycholinguistics. And we can get data from that as well. What am I doing? So, now something very non-morphological and non-Finnish. How to operate with human beings. If we are working with in sort of a multidisciplinary area like psycholinguistics or neurolinguistics, where in order to get good results we should have experts from the various fields. Just like Ari and us linguists are doing. Linguists are no experts in ERP kind of things, neurophysiology, so we have to have a neurophysiologist as a partner. I've been working with Matti Laine for 35 years, a psychologist, and we are soulmates. She's sort of psychologist and linguist. It's a good thing. So there's something, this is sort of all farts lament. Basic question is, this should have been done more elegantly, but I do it. This is my third PowerPoint presentation. I've done this. The first one was in Greece, the second in Italy, and now in Russia. I never do PowerPoint elsewhere. So, autonomous generative linguists, of course, who is Chomskyan, who's doing solely grammar, descriptions of correct sentences in language X? Most probably nobody in this room. So we are sort of at the verges of or overlapping areas of two fields or more fields. And think about this: we are working with experts in experts in other fields. What you should take care, what you should consider. There are different kind of things. When you find somebody, let's say I find a new neurologist or expert in Russian psycholinguistics, I have to be aware that sometime we have to divorce. This affair has to end, most probably this. I've been married academically to many people, neurologists, logopedics, you name it. And you have to, every stage of this development has to be taken, has to be properly treated, so you don't preach against the politeness principles of human contacts. Remember that, because it could be the case that in 5 years you have to cooperate with him or her once again. So don't burn your bridges. And keep your mouth shut about his or her points of incompetence. Don't spread any rumors about his or him, her puking over you after a dinner or something. No. They are colleagues and they have to be treated like colleagues. Not with reverence, but with respect. So there's wooing and courting, which is of course a mating season. We are starting at devising that sort of a being tipsy-turvy drunk or being just engaged are the most beautiful moments of human life. And those are very good things, but you have to think of, sorry about this, and marriage cohabitation is the typical kind of stage that you really work and work. I'll come to that in the later slide. And there's divorce and split up. You have to sort of lay the cards on the table, or whatever term could be used, and say, okay, we did these 2 or 3 articles. Now I don't have time for you any longer. I do something else. Don't leave them hanging in the air, expecting. Just tell them that now I have to work with him, or there are other engagements. Because I've been treated like an old drag sometimes. And although I'm a bit demented now, I remember I will never knock on his door even if he were the last one in that, last representative of his scientific discipline. I remember. And social alimony. Okay, it should have been made more funny, but it's so late in the evening and so forth. And then these are very good things. We are coming to the first slides once again. You have to know what you're doing. You have to take stand to these kind of items. Ontological, epistemological issues. Plop. That you know what you're doing, also what your limits are. Don't claim to be the emperor of Rome. And blueprint issues and so. And if you don't know these things, you have to learn them, because sometimes people talk at that level. Words are fancy, but they ain't. Philosophy is very easy, because it's transparent, clear-cut, concise. But you have to be rational. And these kind of things, you have to sort of, your soulmate in this multidisciplinary effort, let's say linguist and psychologist, linguist, neurologist, or whatever, working together, you have to have the same scientific worldview. Otherwise, things won't. If one is a fervent, let's say, connectionist, and you ain't, nothing will come out of that. Because that's not the forum where you try to teach somebody something and convert him or her. It's not typical when you are doing practical work. And this is the way I would do it. If I'm asking, well, you could ask anybody in New Zealand, if you see that, okay, he or she did a good paper on this or presentation at the conference, you'd like to say, Russian has these kind of things that would very nice suit your research agenda. Why don't we join forces? You have to do it like this, right? Don't just go to say or write to him or her, I like you very much. Have something to offer. And this is something that I've always done. Write, if not in graphic form, write it here. Sort of mental plan of your scientific pursuits, of your projects. And of course it's better to write it down. and approach people with that. It's a quid pro quo. You have to give something if you want to have something. Yeah. And this Groucho Marx thing, of course, refers. Be sort of a very critical when you think about your own pursuits and so forth. Am I really this good? Is this text really good? Because there are zillions of aspiring scientists thinking that they are the best in the world, and it can't be the case. Only one is the best, and of course he's Noam Chomsky. Noam is, at least he. Okay, and this is sort of practical hints. That's the started with philosophical or whatever. It ended sort of very sort of a sociology of science and doing cooperation with people, sort of. Remember the Chrysian principles of information sharing. It has to be well-mannered, it has to be sort of good in duration, it has to be relevant, it has to be spoken out nicely, sort of clearly, and most of all, the Levinsonian politeness principle. Be polite. As I tried not to. Thank you very much. Questions? This has nothing to do with methods of psycholinguistics, but still.
Can I ask another question about the HH data?
Yeah.
So in relation to what you then mentioned, sort of the context, the same things in context. So does this person perform better when the same things are presented in a sentential context or in a pragmatic context?
Yeah, it's better. So it's sort of it actually gave us the idea of why not trying text items embedded in texts with normals as well, and we found out that it's easier in texts.
So he can't read in the car
No.
as a standalone word, but he can read somebody sits in the car better. Better.
Yes, better, but not as beautifully as car.
Right. Yeah.
So it's never, so it's always not 100%.
No, this is
while monomorphic forms are always there.
This is a beautiful demonstration of segmentation and the difference between derivation and inflection.
Yeah, it is. And of course we have done it because Finnish sort of allows that. It's strange that the typical thing in psycholinguistics is that let's take an example of a natural language. Let's say English. And it even applies things that they are writing about morphology. Morphology and English. English has poor man's morphology. This is morphology, or Inuit is still better because it's polysynthetic. There you have sentence lexical entries and inflectional forms, wishy-washy across the field. If I had time, I would go to Greenland. Well, you perhaps you would like to see me there. And study Inuit, because that's really, because you have sentence at the top of this. Yeah. Go to Nuuk. There's a university, by the way. And there's a psycholinguist I know. So study Inuit and go to Nuuk. It would be very interesting, and somebody will do that.
Some people in Copenhagen do.
No wonder. But who takes Danes seriously? Okay, if not, thank you very much. And